Right now, in distant training camps and in crowded cities, there are people plotting to take American lives. That will be the case a year from now, 5 years from now, and in all probability 10 years from now. There may be a number of people who cannot be prosecuted for past crimes, in some cases because evidence may be tainted, but who nonetheless pose a threat to the security of the United States. Al-Qaeda terrorists and their affiliates are at war with the United States, and those that we capture, like other prisoners of war, must be prevented from attacking us again. My administration has begun to reshape the standards that apply to ensure that they are in line with the rule of law. We must have clear, defensible, and lawful standards for those who fall into this category. We must have a thorough process of periodic review so that any prolonged detention is carefully evaluated and justified. Our goal is to construct a legitimate legal framework for the remaining Guantanamo detainees that cannot be transferred. Our goal is not to avoid a legitimate legal framework. In our constitutional system, prolonged detention should not be the decision of any one man. If and when we determine that the United States must hold individuals to keep them from carrying out an act of war, we will do so within a system that involves judicial and congressional oversight. And so going forward, my administration will work with Congress to develop an appropriate legal regime so that our efforts are consistent with our values and our Constitution.
You'll construct a legal regime to make indefinite detention legal. You will, what does he say? Develop an appropriate legal regime. So you can construct a whole new system outside the courts, even outside the military commissions, so that you can indefinitely imprison people without charges. And you'll build that system from scratch. What's that somebody said about ad hoc legal strategies?
The government now laying out its legal argument for killing American citizens overseas without a trial. But what about targeting people on U.S. soil? Can they now kill American citizens inside the country? The head of the FBI, when asked about that on Capitol Hill yesterday, stumbled around on this.
Does that only apply to U.S. citizen that's overseas, or does that apply to U.S. citizen that's here?
I'd have to go back. I'm not certain whether that was addressed or not. I'm not certain whether that was addressed or not. I'm not certain whether that was addressed or not.
Correct. We do not have our priorities straight. The last time the federal government claimed that it could kill Americans was in the Civil War. And even Lincoln said it could only be done during combat. This federal government, this administration says it can kill Americans when they're riding with their children in a car in a desert. At Northwestern University Law School, the Attorney General of the United States manifested extraordinary ignorance of the Constitution of the United States and suggested the president can kill anybody he wants outside the United States if that person is dangerous, if that person has committed crimes, and if it's impractical to arrest that person. Not in the opinion of a jury, but in the opinion of the president and some secret advisors. The Constitution says to the contrary. The Constitution says if the government wants your life or your liberty or your property, it has to articulate to a jury what law you have violated and prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt to that jury. It's called due process. Without due process, the government could take anything it wanted and kill anybody it wanted. And Attorney General Holder ought to know that. I suggest that Bob Mueller does. And the reason he evaded that answer is because he wants to keep his job.
We're entering into an age of deception and betrayal by our own government.
They've allocated foreign troops. They've been training with the Polish Army and the Russian Army. The Russian Army has shown up in Colorado. There's been reports that the Russian Army have been starting the fires. And the reports that I got, that I put in that article that you just mentioned, the fires were started right in front of areas that were militarily secured. So it's my understanding that they might have been starting the fires to try and get people out of the way, get people moved out of the way so they wouldn't see what they're doing.
I mean, if you go to the people at the World Bank and the IMF And these people who are straight, suits, all of them, they have a set of curves which would stand your hair on end. When they propagate the curve of population, the curve of toxification of the environment, the curve related to the ozone hole disappearing, you see, it's finished in sometime in the next 50 years. They don't talk about this because they don't want to panic the vast numbers of people who just go to work and raise their kids and pray somebody smarter is doing something about all this. But they don't believe there is any kind of future. And I don't either. I think we're going to, that it's business as usual is not on the menu, folks. We're either going to go into an era of immense resource scarcity, regimentation, governmental interference in our lives, tremendous propagandistic efforts to make us do one thing or another, or we're going to pull the plug on scientism and its stooges and the institutions which feed it.
What you see with people is that they're desperate to hear what they want to hear. For people to say, oh no, these conspiracy theorists, they're all crazy, they're all paranoid, it's not really going on, it's ridiculous, and this is done to protect you, this is done for you, we're the government, this is why we're doing it, watch the telly, there's a game on in a minute, and you'll be fine, and we're just going to build another concentration camp, okay? See you later.
Take you to the FEMA camps being built by Halliburton right now to house 50 million Americans. They're building enough concentration camps in America.
The language which precluded the application of Section 1031 to American citizens was in the bill that we originally approved in the Armed Services Committee, and the administration asked us to remove the language which says that U.S. citizens and lawful residents would not be subject to this section. Is the senator familiar with the fact that it was the administration that asked us to remove the very language which we had in the bill which passed the committee, and that we removed it at the request of the administration, that would have said that this determination would not apply to U.S. citizens and lawful residents? I'm just wondering, is the senator familiar with the fact that it was the administration which asked us to remove the very language, the absence of which is now objected to by the senator from Illinois?
I'm familiar now because the senator from Michigan has shared. The following video details the contents of a Department of Defense document entitled Internment and Resettlement Operations, also known as FM 3-39.40. The document is 325 pages long and it is signed by Joyce E. Morrow, Administrative Assistant to the Secretary of the Army. It was created in 2010, however, it has just been recently leaked to the public via the internet and can now be downloaded from multiple sources. In the description below, you'll find a download link for the document. I strongly encourage you to download it yourself and to verify everything that's being said here. The document outlines military procedures for internment and resettlement of civilians, and it describes the layout and the administration of these internment camps. It clearly states on page 38 that it applies within U.S. territory, and it specifically addresses the detainment of U.S. citizens, as is indicated by the identification procedures for new prisoners on page 146, which states that social security numbers are to be recorded alongside their photograph and fingerprints. Included in the list of organizations which may be involved in these internment operations are the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, the Department of Defense, and the United Nations. On page 56, the document outlines the responsibilities of psychological operations officers within the camps, among which it states that a PSYOP officer develops and executes indoctrination programs to reduce or remove antagonistic attitudes and identifies political activists. On page 281, the document goes into more detail regarding the role of psychological operations within the camps, specifically in regards to pacifying the population and ensuring cooperation. On page 238, it gives the conditions for the use of deadly force in such camps. Among the justifications for lethal force, it includes to terminate an active escape attempt. That point right there should make it clear that these camps are not benevolent disaster relief type facilities. On page 244, the document calls for the use of snipers during riots to, quote, scan a crowd and identify agitators and riot leaders for apprehension and fire lethal rounds if warranted. On page 260, it shows the basic layout for a facility focusing on detainment. It is depicted with interrogation areas, tribunal areas, and mortuaries. Each detainment facility is designed to hold 4,000 prisoners, and they are depicted with multiple levels of barbed wire separating compartments within the facilities, with a double barbed wire fence enclosing them, and watched over by 24 guard towers. On page 261, the document depicts the layout for what they call civilian resettlement facilities, which are designed to house 8,000 people. Though it uses the word resettlement, the plans show multiple levels of barbed wire dividing the sections of the facility, with double barbed wire fencing on the outside, as well as 16 guard towers. On page 262, the layout for facilities designed for what they call non-compliant prisoners is shown. These camps are designed to hold up to 300 prisoners, they have 3 interrogation centers, and are guarded by 13 guard towers. Now, if there's any question whether these plans are active or just theoretical, this should be settled by the fact that the U.S. Army has been running ads for job positions in these camps since 2009, and apparently, they're still hiring. Once again, if you look in the description, you'll find all the links you need to verify this information. It's important to note here that this document was created in 2010, which was under the Obama administration, and it predates the NDAA of 2012, which authorized military detainment of U.S. citizens. This clearly shows a long-term agenda at work.
Tonight I discovered something in the southernmost portion of Arizona, near the border of Arizona and Mexico, in the western portion of that border. This is what I discovered. This is a huge prison complex, fully operational, people living there. First of all, there is a road that goes around the entire complex, lined with a fence that goes around the entire complex. Inside that fence and road, there's another road that goes around this portion of the complex. This is portion number 1. Inside that road is another fence line. And when you take a look at the fence line, you realize it is bent inward with barbed wire. Very high and bent inward toward the facility, meaning this fence is not to keep people out, it is not to keep people safe, it is to keep people in. That automatically makes it a prison. We have light and camera all along in between this fence line and this barbed wire fence line, which is the basic layout of a prison. Part 1 of the complex, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and a center building with one large field in the middle. All of the buildings seem to be fairly well equipped. They have central air units on the outsides of the buildings, very bright LED lighting in the yard, and of course lots of guard shacks in the yard and around the entire facility. Look at part 2. It's very different. In this part of the facility, we see outside cages where people can go if they've gotten in scuffles and so forth. Their outside time is spent in a cage. And each one of these barracks has its own fenced-in yard. In area number 3, it would seem to be a little lesser punishment. We have basketball courts. This one actually has people on it. Guard shacks, baseball diamond, each building has its own fenced-in area, as well as the main yard. This is a massive prison facility. I would say this one is really high-tech. Very high-tech prison facility. I'll show you where the workers live, a little bit more luxurious, with swimming pools here and other recreational facilities and satellite TV. And all of these things didn't really bother me. I saw a lot of FEMA vehicles. That concerned me. Now, this is one thing that concerned me. Not just buses for the inmates, but lots of FEMA vehicles. These appear to be FEMA vehicles, and we find them throughout the facility, driving around the area, FEMA vehicles. Like that. Lots and lots of FEMA vehicles. Both prisoner transport vehicles that are FEMA and individual agent vehicles. That concerned me. Number one, this facility is not listed among the prisons in Arizona, though it is a very prominent prison out in the middle of the desert east of Yuma, Arizona. Now, associated with this prison, across the road are these very strange fields. When I looked at them, they're pits of some sort, fairly deep, I'd say about 6 feet deep or so, 8 down and 8 across, with some in the middle, with a huge long pit in the middle, so deep that water has seeped into it. In the middle of these pits is what I believe to be a killing field.
Being driven into the coffin of the American Republic. Yet Congress remains in total denial as our liberties are rapidly fading before our eyes. The process is propelled by unwarranted fear and ignorance as to the true meaning of liberty. It is driven by economic myths. Who would have ever thought that the current generation and Congress would stand idly by and watch such a rapid disintegration of the American Republic, which is equivalent to granting dictatorial powers to the president. Our presidents can now, on their own, order assassinations, including American citizens, enforce indefinite imprisonments without due process, treat all Americans as suspected terrorists. It appears that the fate of the American Republic is now sealed.
What civilization is 6 billion people trying to make themselves happy by standing on each other's shoulders and kicking each other's teeth in. It's not a pleasant situation, and yet you can stand back and look at this planet and see that we have the money, the power, the medical understanding, the scientific know-how, the love, and the community to produce the kind of human paradise. But we are led by the least among us, the least intelligent, the least noble, the least visionary. We are led by the least among us, and we do not fight back against the dehumanizing values that are handed down as control icons. This is something, I mean, I don't really want to get off on this tear because it's a lecture in itself, but culture is not your friend. Culture is for other people's convenience and the convenience of various institutions, churches, companies, tax collection schemes, what have you. It is not your friend. It insults you. It disempowers you. It uses and abuses you. None of us are well treated by culture. And yet we glorify, the creative potential of the individual, the rights of the individual. We understand the felt presence of experience is what is most important, but the culture is a perversion. It fetishizes objects, creates consumer mania, it creates endless forms of false happiness, endless forms of false understanding in the form of swirly religions and silly cults. It invites people to diminish themselves and dehumanize themselves by
behaving like machines.